We're on part 3 of the communist, atheistic, materialistic, Marxist indoctrination by major universities in the United States. This was actually at my doctoral program, my cognitive psychology class. Cognitive psychology means thinking, so pretty important. Cognitive psychology. So let's see the information that that we were exposed to here. Remember, Our Lady of Fatima said that the errors of Russia will spread until enough Catholics are living the Fatima message. The Fatima message is Roman Catholic SOS. Rosary daily, consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, scapular, wear the brown scapular, O, offer up sufferings, and S is Saturdays, the first Saturday devotion. And this week coming up is the first Saturday. So when enough Catholics do that, then we'll get the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. Russia will be converted, and the errors of Russia will be blown out, basically. But as we see, we've been moving more and more in that direction. So in this series, basically, we're just showing how our college textbooks are training us to think in a certain way. So now this is a doctoral program for cognitive psychology. So many psychologists would have used this book. Now, it's not to say that all the information in the book is bad, as we said before. What it is saying is that the frame of reference from which psychology is being looked at is extremely problematic, and it's anti-Catholic. No doubt about it. It's anti-Catholic, it's anti-scholasticism, it's anti-Thomism, anti-realism, and it's done in subtle ways. And I'm not saying the authors were necessarily trying to do this. The authors were very likely a product of the education they received, so they're just propagating what they've learned. So we'll go through. Page 5. Influences on the study of cognition. How modern cognitive psychology has evolved. So first thing again, an obsession with evolution. Worth noting, however, is that several ideas and certain mental abilities date back at least to the Greek philosophers Aristotle and Plato. For example, both these philosophers wrote extensively on the nature of memory, and then it gives an example from Plato. So while I am happy that they're mentioning Aristotle, to just say, that's great that they say that it stems back from the ancient Greeks. It kind of sets them aside here, because if you notice, it says both the philosophers wrote extensively on the nature of memory. If you read Aristotle, you know he wrote about a heck of a lot more than memory. So it's just to relegate Aristotle and Aristotelianism to memory is a slap in the face. And it's never how the Catholic Church looked at it. So St. Thomas Aquinas said there's the light of faith and the light of reason. The light of faith, of course, comes from our Lord Jesus Christ, as God revealed and God passed on to the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church teaches on the light of faith and the light of reason, natural reason. St. Thomas Aquinas, the main doctor of the Church, if you could say that, he said the light of natural reason is Aristotle. So the way Aristotle looked at the world, his whole framework, it's not saying Aristotle got every single thing right, but his framework, his conceptualization of reality is on point, where it doesn't contradict with divine revelation. Okay, so that's a large statement. And remember, with Pope Leo XIII, Aeterni Patris, Thomism was officially named the lens from which to look at reality. Okay, so Thomism was normatized in the Church with Aeterni Patris by Pope Leo XIII. So basically what they did here is they mentioned Aristotle, and they said he just wrote extensively on memory, and we know he wrote on a lot more than just memory. Then it says, other historians of psychology trace the field's roots to philosophers of the 17th and 19th century, including Locke, Hume, Mill, Descartes, and Kant. Okay, so first of all, if we already know that cognition dates back to the ancient Greeks and Aristotle, why are some historians saying here that that cognitive psychology has its roots in the 17th and 19th century? Why are they saying that? That doesn't even make sense. That's factually inaccurate based on what they said a paragraph before. But notice the characters they bring up. Very anti-Catholic, anti-realism, liberalism, all the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, these people who are a departure from the Church. You look at Hume, You look at Descartes. Descartes, we know, drove the Cartesian divide between the body and the soul. I think, therefore I am, which is the opposite of what the church teaches. Because we're capable of thinking. We don't exist because we think. We think because we exist. So that's precisely backwards. And we know Immanuel Kant. Kant is a major break from reality. You could remember Kant's philosophy just by using his name. Kant believed you can't know anything for sure. He said you can't know anything for sure. So this is a very shaky ground to begin any field of knowledge. To start with, I can't know anything. So they're mentioning these characters right here, Hume, Locke, and all these people. Meanwhile, they're not talking about any of the saints. None of the doctors of the church. You would think that the church was, very primitive and they don't really know that much. It's the anti-intelligence. Wrong. If you read the writings of the doctors of the church, the great theologians, that it is very robust, their writings, and highly intelligent. Highly. So the fact that they were set aside, Aristotle was set aside. The great doctors of the church and the great theologians aren't even mentioned. And this is the height of the intelligentsia. This is basically the mode of thinking: scholasticism, Thomism, and Aristotelianism for 300 years before Christ. And then beyond, up until these characters came along in the 15th, 16th, 17th century. Or no, what did they say here? The 17th through 19th century. That's a massive gap of time that they just did not mention at all. So that's problematic, and it shapes the doctoral student's mind into thinking, well, Aristotle and the doctors of the church, the theologians, they're not important. They really didn't have much to contribute. Nothing could be further than the truth. They, again, like I said, robust writings, highly in-depth, highly intelligent, and it's just swept to the side. They want to start with the Enlightenment because it's liberalism. It's a break from the Catholic Church. We see that as a recurring theme in all of these books. They go on to talk about empiricism. People are the way they are because of previous learning. Anytime you hear an empiricism, that makes you think of materialism, naturalism, basically saying that we only believe what we see and what we sense with the five senses. Empiricism, positivism, naturalism, materialism, that's all chunked into the same category, basically. So it's a pushing aside of the soul, a pushing aside of theology, a pushing aside of philosophy, just empiricism. So that's just another red flag. Like I said, the fact that they mentioned that was a theory in psychology's history, fine, but don't skip over the scholastics, don't skip over the theologians or the doctors of the church, because they spoke about the human person too. And not only did they speak about the human person, they spoke about the human person accurately because it reflects what was revealed to us by Almighty God, who came to earth and continues to speak to us today in the 21st century through the Catholic Church, the church of all time, the teachings of all time. Not if some bishop or even if possibly the Pope says something that's contrary to the teachings of all time, then we know that those statements would be null and void. The teachings of all time are teachings passed on from Christ himself. I'm on page 17. Current trends in the study of cognition. So now they're telling you where the field is at right now. Scholars from the fields such as cognitive psychology, computer science, philosophy, linguistics, neuroscience, and anthropology, recognizing their mutual interests, came together and founded an interdisciplinary field known as the cognitive science, with the birthday of September 11th, 1956. So basically, these characters from these different fields came together, say, hey, we share an interest. Let's come up with this new field of cognitive science. Again, it's a slap to the teachings of the church, who have a very good understanding of the person, of the human person, based on the realism of Aristotle, the light of natural reason, combined with supernatural knowledge, the light of supernatural faith, which was given to us through the Catholic Church by Jesus Christ. So none of that, all these other non-religious characters came together, and they're going to come up with the cognitive science. Again, it's not even just what they're saying, it's what they're not saying. The people's names they're mentioning and the people's names that they're not mentioning. They're mentioning names from the Enlightenment. They're not mentioning people from the church. So it's an injustice because, remember, all the major universities were founded by the Catholic Church. The Pope wanted them to get started. So nothing could be further from the truth than to say that the Church is against knowledge and the universities. But we do know that the communist goals that were put before Congress in 1963, numbers 18 and 19, are to infiltrate the schools, and 19 was infiltrate the school newspapers. And we're seeing that right here. Maybe it's done in a subtle way, but it's there. Now they talk about in page 28 the evolutionary approach. And here's what they say, the last paragraph. In general, evolutionary psychologists believe we understand the system best if we understand the evolutionary pressures on our ancestors. So it's saying evolutionary psychology, and again, evolution is a theme that you're going to see that's constantly brought up in these textbooks. They say that basically this is the best way to understand the system, not just psychology, any system. And again, this is the lens. If you went to college, you know what I'm talking about. All that's pushed is this evolutionary theory. You don't hear about creation. You don't hear about the intervention of God. It's just, well, we all can't agree on religion, so therefore we're going to start from something we can agree on. They're going to make up a new religion, evolution, which is again against the Catholic faith. Macroevolution, I should say, that everything exists, that everything evolved from a single cellular organism. That is antithetical to the Catholic faith. That is heresy. To say that there's microevolution, in other words, evolution within a species, that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. But now there's an obsession with evolution, which is why you see the word evolution used over and over again in all these college textbooks. And then finally, by page 59, we start up with the different optical illusions, ways that your brain is fooled. So we have that on this page. On page 61, we see another illusion. We see other illusions. Basically, what they're showing is that our brain is imperfect. Our perception is imperfect. In other words, we make certain predictable mistakes optically as well as cognitively. So they show optical illusions to show you can't trust your senses, and then they would go through the cognitive distortions to show that we make common and predictable mistakes in our mind. That's true, and I think that's very important to know, that our perceptions and our cognition isn't perfect. But that doesn't mean they're not trustworthy or reliable. If our senses and our thinking was not trustworthy and reliable, you wouldn't be able to walk down the street. You wouldn't be able to drive a car. You wouldn't be able to just sit here because maybe the ceiling is going to fall down. How do I know I have a phone in front of me? I have to be able to trust my senses. I have to know that if I reach over here, I'll grab my can of seltzer. If I'm Immanuel Kant and I can't be sure that the seltzer can is here, I'm not going to try reaching for it, right? So our senses, like our thinking, is not perfect, but it is reliable. And what Aristotle did is the opposite of what a lot of these characters do. Again, page 60 in the book, they're starting with optical illusions, showing you, you really can't trust your thinking. Aristotle did the opposite. He built everything out based on what we can know, on natural reason, on first principles. He's starting with what we know. And then, of course, later on in his writings, he does go into mistakes that people or common mistakes that people will make. But that's not how he builds things out. So starting with distrust of our senses, beginning on page 60, it's not okay. It's getting us started on shaky ground. So, like I said, there's a lot of great information in this book. I really like this class. I believe I got an A- in this class. But the way it's set up, the lens from which to view the field of cognitive psychology is very, very shaky because Aristotle is pushed aside. The Enlightenment thinkers are emphasized. The evolutionary theory is emphasized. What else did we see? Just a lot of dangerous assumptions. When you hear about naturalism, empiricism, it's dangerous. They're antithetical to the teachings of the church. They're antithetical to realism. So it's not bad that they mention that, but what there should be is some kind of disclaimer saying this thinking definitively does not accurately reflect reality, and you don't see that. So, like I said, a lot of these errors are subtle, but they're in there. And once these assumptions are presented to the student, now the student builds their knowledge base on top of these assumptions, and that's where it gets dangerous. Because then the mind starts to split. You start thinking schizophrenically. You start thinking, well, here's my faith over here, and here's my education over there. And it can't be like that. Everything has to be part of one cohesive whole. That's what St. Thomas Aquinas understood. That's why he's the great doctor of the church. That's why at the Council of Trent, there were 2 books in the front of the room, the Bible and the Summa Theologiae, St. Thomas Aquinas' great works. So we have to have a unifying theory of knowledge. Truth has to all go together. There's no such thing as, well, here's the light, even though I said there's the light of truth and there's the light of reason and the light of revelation, the light of faith. It's really not on both sides. They have to be combined together because there is only one truth. And if it doesn't make sense all the way through, if it's not internally consistent, then it's not the truth. So we need to have a unified presentation, a unified model of reality. So we'll keep going through the textbooks. Like I said, this is cognitive psychology. This was at a doctoral program. Make sure you stay with us. God bless you. God bless your families. And today on the feast day of Christ the King, Viva Cristo Rey. And remember, Fatima message, Roman Catholic SOS, Rosary daily, consecrate yourself to Mary, wear the scapular, offer up your sufferings, and Saturdays. The first Saturday devotion, the Saturday coming up is the first Saturday. Make sure you get to Mass, go to confession, do your meditation, and pray the Rosary. That's the only way we get out of this jam. That's the only way all these books become Catholic. Take care.